Great. Thanks, everybody, for joining us and coming out here. And it's been an epic 3 days. We've learned so much from so many different perspectives on this exciting new medium. And yeah, I'm honored to be a part of this conversation. My name's Javier Fadul. I'm a creative technologist and entrepreneur. I've done a lot of different things throughout my years. I got very lucky at a young age, and I had the opportunity to start learning how to program and create digital abstractions that help explain reality, and it's been a hell of a journey. And now the medium of immersive technologies has taken us to a whole new level, and I can't stop thinking about it. I'm completely obsessed, and I've been spending quite a bit of time in the metaverse, kind of understanding the possibility space of what human cognition means in this new medium. And I'd like to share some insights with you all today. I actually work for several different companies. Culture Pilot is a branding marketing company that does immersive experiences for startups and products. We help create a lot of really cool narratives to help connect audiences to companies. Matt's here. I see you there, buddy. How are you? Thanks for coming out. Excellent. Station Houston is an accelerator co-working space in downtown Houston where we help mentor and accelerate new innovation. And have you guys heard about this space before? I see a couple of familiar faces. Excellent, excellent. Excited to see how this space continues to bring our community together. Yeah. At Business Labs, we create data visualizations, dashboards, business intelligence, all sorts of different analytics to help solve really big problems. At Fuel Tech, we introduce industry to immersive technologies and help solve business problems in a big way through training and simulations. With TEDx Houston, I've been curating conversations around innovation for the past 6 years here in Houston. Has anybody been to one of those events in the past? Cool, excellent. Glad to see you, man. Thanks for coming out, yeah. And that's been a hell of a journey. I've met so many really interesting people because of that. And at Visualized, we curate a global conversation on information design, data visualization, and how those mediums are helping us solve really big problems. That event takes place in New York City and also in London and Berlin and a couple of different places around the world. So throughout these communities, I've had some really interesting conversations about these mediums and how they've been evolving and helping us solve some really big problems. And yeah, what a year it's been, right? I want to give a special shout out to the team at Immersive, Immersive Technologies, introducing us here and being such great VR Sherpas for our community. Juwan and William, Eric, Kevin, everybody, so grateful for everything you guys are doing. I know you've done thousands and thousands of demos, and there's still a lot of opportunity to introduce people into this. So thanks again for doing that. And yeah, what a year it's been, right? Reality has really been split in half. And now we have the virtual and the real, and somewhere in between this idea of augmented reality, right? Which we know is probably going to be the most valuable part of the spectrum. And because of that, we've had rebrand after rebrand of what this thing means. Augmented reality, mediated reality. Reality is another one that's kind of interesting. I don't know if you've heard about this term, but it's the idea that you're essentially going to have ad blockers that will be able to remove things from our reality that maybe we don't really want. It's kind of an interesting concept. Merged reality, blended reality, holographic reality, all of these labels for something that I think is just essentially part of human nature. We have this dichotomy that it's presented, but ultimately I think a better way of thinking about it is this idea of nested realities. Ultimately this base reality that we're a part of that, unless you agree with simulation theory, we are really part of, and then you can kind of go up and down the hierarchy of those realities, and every time you jump between those realms, whatever you're creating becomes more and more interesting. I have some water here, pardon me a second. Right, but as I mentioned, this dichotomy, I think, has been part of our journey. There we go. Oh, yeah, so mixed reality. And this idea of jumping between realms. Actually, this morning I was practicing the talk in virtual reality, which is my first time doing this. I usually don't rehearse my talks that much, but it was kind of an interesting opportunity to explore what that actually means. And y'all are much better looking than these virtual avatars, I gotta say. And I'm much more excited about actually sharing these ideas with you than I was trying to make eye contact with these surreal, uncanny valley people in this weird environment. But it was a lot of fun. Actually, I got into the flow after a little bit, and yeah, it was an interesting example of how these mediums are helping us kind of bring our cognition into these spaces. So yeah. But yeah, this dichotomy, I think, has been part of our human journey for centuries, since the beginning of history, in a way. The struggle between defining our objective reality and abstractions that represent that objective reality. Philosophers have been arguing about this for millennia. Here's Aristotle and Plato. Aristotle pointing down to this objective, it's here. Plato pointing up to the sky, saying, "No, dude, ideas that virtual world is maybe better." And I think each one of those realms actually has different properties, principles that if we think about them and remix them, we can use those principles to make the things that we create more and more compelling. Climbing up and down that hierarchy. Because ultimately, it's what our brain does. One of the earlier presenters talking about ethical brain hacking was kind of talking about this idea that our brains are the holodeck. We are creating abstractions, virtual representations of this real world, and every time we make eye contact, we're sharing these little moments of presence that anchor us into what's actually happening at this moment. And cognition itself has these properties, right? It's embodied, a mind by itself is not really a mind. Marvin Minsky from MIT, one of his latest papers, or final papers, made that case that artificial intelligence will never be intelligent until it actually has a body. It's situated, which means it's contextual. The environment that this mind is in right now is trying to present these ideas to you all, and that's my role. And it's behavioral, right? It's not just thinking about thinking, but thinking about doing something. That's really where things are interesting. Cognition is time-bound. There's only so many hours in a day, so many days in a week, and so forth. And cognition can be externalized. And these are these artifacts that we've been creating since the beginning of history that help us understand how our brain works, help us understand how society works, help us understand how, what it means to be part of this world. I love maps, old maps. Has anybody been to the Antiquarium in Houston, here in Houston? I'm not seeing any hands. Wow, it's a really wonderful place. You can go there, you can pick up these artifacts, you can hold them up close, you can look at them. Some of them are hundreds and hundreds of years old and worth tens of thousands of dollars. The Antiquarium. Yeah, it's over there on Kirby and Westheimer, around that area. Awesome place, phenomenal, $25,000 maps, and you just hold them and you can look at them really up close. So I was there, and my friend Ed told me that if I ever make it to the Library of Congress, to ask for the Ortelius. Has anybody been to the Library of Congress before? Yeah, awesome. Did you make it to the map room? Any chance? No? Well, next time you go, ask for the Ortelius. And I bring this up because I think these maps are essentially mixed reality artifacts as well, right? It's a physical piece of paper, a physical book, but it's embedded with this abstraction, this cognition, this intelligence. It's ink, but it's not really ink. It's mountains, right? It's hills, it's politics, it's drama. And then at the bottom right, you see this hierarchy tree, another nested hierarchy kind of model that represents several centuries of lineage of people, of their lives, right? So this sort of idea that this is an augmented reality display to some extent from half a millennia ago that helped us understand our context in this big picture in this world. And this was a cartographer, Abraham Ortelius. When I asked for this book in the Library of Congress, the the Librarian of Congress got really excited. She's like, "You're asking for the Ortelius. Which one do you want?" And I'm like, "I don't want to bother you, but whichever one you have handy." She said, "If you want the oldest one, I'm going to have to talk to the lead librarian, but I could show you this one that I really like. Somebody painted it, and it's from 1612. Is that okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's totally fine. 1612, wow." And she was super excited about showing me this one. And another interesting insight from this journey is this idea that the data that was embedded onto this artifact was then upgraded by somebody else, years later, who decided to make it colorful, right? And it's a simple upgrade, but it made it so much more rich, right? And then hundreds and hundreds of years later, here I am in front of this book, and I get the opportunity to flip through every page. And while I'm flipping through every page, I happen to be wearing a wearable camera, Google Glass at the time, and I took a photo of every single spread. Because I couldn't believe this thing was actually in front of me, a physical object that has traveled through time and really represented everything that we knew about the world. This was the first world atlas, published as one single tome. And there was many copies of that as well, which is kind of fascinating to even think about. And then the scope of the work, right? One person mapped the world. Really quite remarkable. And at the very end, or actually, yeah, before at the very end, this is our part of town, let's say. And you can see South America is at a higher resolution because it was the 1500s. Up north, North America is sort of distorted. It was kind of fuzzy that I didn't really quite know. And a lot of the labels for the cities are actually not at all what we think of now. But the city I was born is Barranquilla, which is right here, is where Shakira is from. And it was actually labeled. And I was really happy to see that, that it's like that meant so much to me. And it still does, looking at it, like knowing that that place existed so many years ago when this book was actually made. So it's like, this augmented reality, mixed reality object, like just looking at it allowed me to sort of have this time dilation, time travel experience that I thought was really great while I'm hanging out at this library. Really, really fun times. And at the very end, I saw this beautiful stamp, the hand of God, like, pushing down on this tool, making a mark on this paper, and the label, labor and constancy, right? So constant hard work. That's really what it took to make this massive thing. And I found out later that this imprint was actually made by the people that, created the press that helped take this book into scale to make it, shareable and actionable and everything else. And so the tool really stands out to me as well, because it's a tool that's like really simple, right? You can use it to make measurements, you anchor it, and you make a line. But if you're really good at it, you can like map the world, like one person, like learning from all these people and everything else. I mean, it wasn't just him, but he was actually able to use that tool, which is very intuitive as a tool, to create something very, very beautiful and complex. So when I create tools, I always kind of carry that idea in mind of like making things that are instantly knowable, like very intuitive, but at the same time infinitely masterable, which is to say you can use these tools to like solve questions and problems that you can't even think about yet, and continue to use them and learn from them as you explore them. So that exploratory interface is something that I really am drawn to. And so now jumping hundreds of years ahead, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the piano and the typewriter, those are the most compelling interfaces that we had at the time. Also immediately knowable. You walk up to a piano, you can hammer it and immediately make sound. But if you master it, you can create human expression in ways that are like really, really fascinating. And above my piano is that little typewriter, the Smith Corona. Interestingly, like the interface, right? And this was at the end of the Industrial Revolution, roughly, right before the information age, right? The interface that we use to type, like, our thoughts into paper made the leap and actually became part of the information age through the computers that, we all use every day. And I love this thing. It's mechanical. It doesn't need connectivity. It always works, which is amazing. It's heavy, definitely. But the types of lists that I make with it are very different from the types of lists that I make, with my phone or with an email, or actually with this thing. Another interesting tool, Google Home. I can actually just talk to my room and make a list also, right? But the types of lists that I make there are very different from the types of lists that I make. And it's just an interesting example of just like what an amazing world we live in right now, where, in my living room I have these objects. They all still work, but at the same time they're like leaps and bounds in terms of like innovation and what it means to create. And they're all really amazing tools. Very intuitive, but very powerful. Shout out to Mr. Smitty. He's over here in 3rd Ward. He's still alive and he's still repairing typewriters. This guy in his heyday was responsible for all of the contracts for IBM and the government, and like he was the guy that fixed all of their typewriters. So he was making pretty good money, and so he dedicated his life to that medium, and he's still doing it to this day. I think he charges, if I remember correctly, like $54.97, and it never changed the amount of money that he charges to fix the typewriters. But yeah, shout out to him, and amazing that he's alive while all these technological changes are happening, right? And so now we're in this information age. We have these beautiful black mirrors that are just so compelling and allow us to capture reality, experience reality in different ways, tangible. We can touch them, we can play with them. And yeah, in many ways, like we're kind of addicted to them, right? Like we can't let go. And there's these weird behaviors that are happening where, this photo came up from the campaign where, all these people are present in the room with this very important person. But instead of being present, they decide to turn around and then use their phones to capture them in front of that face, right? And it's a lot of them. I mean, it's like, but then you can see this one guy right here. I don't know if you can see his face. You see him? Like, I love that he's just peeking through and he's like, I'm really here right now. And kind of in the wave of like, remote Snapchatting and everything else. But yeah, so these behaviors are kind of emerging and they're kind of curious and kind of show us that, well, I'm guilty too. If you're in front of a very compelling face, you can't help but take a picture of your face next to the face. And in this case, the face is one of Google's self-driving cars, you know. And I met it when I was in Mountain View recently, and I couldn't help it, had to take a selfie. And if you think about it, like this vehicle is one of these things that is part of the end of the information age. And in a sense, it's just really a very smart camera with wheels that's able to measure the environment and make decisions and get us places where we need to go. So these artifacts, you know, are like part of our reality. And so taking a photo kind of looks like this at this point, which is weird because it breaks presence. You're not making eye contact with the person taking a photo of you. Wearables makes it so maybe you can make eye contact while the photo is being taken. So Google Glass, I loved the device. It was an amazing system that enhanced cognition, enabled me to capture moments of reality and remember things in a way that wasn't possible before. And I think it's an example of one device that was sort of marking the end of the information age and trying to get us into this experience age where we're no longer bound by this idea of like having to look at the thing, but instead we can try to be here and connect and have contextual information, accessible information in our view. But now at this point, glass is vintage wearable technology, right? I think it's been 4 years since it was launched, right? And I think in many years it's probably 5 or 6 years ahead of its time. So, 1 or 2 years left, we're probably going to have another wave of these types of wearable cognitive enhancers that give us the ability of capturing reality and experiencing reality in a more contextual way. And as you probably know, Snapchat, another one of these companies that's very much about the experience age, announced their devices, which are kind of weird looking, I think. But, millennials, that's going to be fun, I'm sure. Yeah. But yeah, so we've been using these wearables on our faces for many years. Since the beginning of photography, we had stereoscopes that allowed us to kind of experience this illusion, stereoscopic illusion of depth. And back then, the images were static. But then, as you know, now we can stick our phones in them. They're essentially supercomputers that have positional tracking and are connected to the broad information web of the internet and allow us to really teleport ourselves to these compelling experiences and to share them with our family. Here's my grandma surfing, and it's kind of amazing to think about. Just 3 degrees of freedom, 360 content, but for our elders, like getting to experience things that they would never dream of. It's really, really very empowering. At the same time, we have to carry that with responsibility. Don't put your grandma in roller coasters. I think that's kind of a thing. And like haunted houses and stuff like that. I'm really kind of excited but weary to see all the reaction videos that are going to be coming out after the holidays this year. And I hope nothing bad happens because these things are really compelling. They convince you that you're there and they're just getting more and more powerful. The HTC Vive gives us 18 degrees of freedom in the virtual world. And it's no longer just our occipital in our oral kind of neurons that are like mapping the environment around us, but you take a step in virtual reality and now your somatosensory cortex is enabled, which enhances your spatial neurons as well. You can actually walk around in virtual reality. Like the sense of presence that gives you is really quite remarkable. One of my favorite experiences, and this is the first week that I got to spend time in the metaverse, was when I accidentally caused a supernova in my buddy's living room. It was a really intense moment. I accidentally destroyed planet Earth and caused a superstellar explosion and got stardust all over the place. Cleanup was a lot easier, fortunately, just a couple of clicks. But yeah, these experiences are really compelling, and it's just the beginning. Like, this system has been out for 6 months. Next year, it's going to be like exponential, the types of experiences that we're going to be able to both experience and to create. All of you here are in that process, and I'm honored to be a part of the conversation. And then HoloLens, as a system, allows us to kind of blend those realities in a really interesting way. One of my favorite stories from this journey is Alex Kipman and Jeff Norris. Jeff Norris is the guy with the NASA shirt. He's a hologram in this photo. I met him at Visualized, I think 3 years before he was on the TED stage, and he was telling us how these immersive systems were enabling their researchers to make better inferences on geographical data, substantially. He was doing the rigorous scientific research to demonstrate that the mission-approved tools, two-dimensional visualizations of geography, were just not sufficient in comparison to these immersive systems. 3 years later, it turns out he was talking about the HoloLens prototype, and then Alex Kipman, who manages the user experience of HoloLens on the TED stage, invited him to teleport, essentially, into the TED stage. And so this mixed reality image is really interesting, but I should break it down a little bit. Alex is actually there. Jeff Norris is not there. The Martian data is not there. And so the audience on the TED stage sees Alex on the TED stage, and then the screens behind can see what Alex is seeing, which is the hologram, right? The mixed reality kind of experience. At the very end of this talk, the host of that session comes on stage and asks some question to Alex Kipman, and Alex asks her if she wants Jeff to come back. And she's like, no, I just want to talk to you right now. Before she knows it, she's actually right next to Jeff, invading his personal space, but he's not actually there, and she sees it in the screen, and she literally jumps. Like, she has a physical reaction to this hologram that wasn't actually, in her real view, just in the ambient view, and the audience laughed. But it was this really interesting moment of like, the sort of social norms that we're used to, and how like those things are going to be changing really rapidly. And so she asked Jeff, "Where are you right now?" And he says, "I'm 3 places. I'm in an office down the block, I'm on the TED stage, and I'm on Mars." And he's right. Kind of remarkable. So I love that. It's very fascinating. And so these physical illusions are going to be part of our medium. We're essentially leveraging optical and aural illusions, and now we're creating these physical illusions. And I think I selected 5 of them that I think are specifically compelling. And we can use these 5 physical illusions as essentially like a barometer to some extent of how virtually native these experiences are. So if your experience can leverage these 5 physical illusions, it's like something really, really compelling that maybe would only be possible in virtual reality. So they're the plausibility illusion, haptics or redirected touch, body ownership illusion, space or time dilation, and social presence. These all come from like different research papers that I've read over time, and I've kind of like distilled it into these 5 that I think are specifically interesting. And I'd like to kind of open the conversation to some extent with you all. If you have some ideas of like specific experiences that you've had that kind of highlight some of these, I'd love to hear from you. So the first one's a plausibility illusion. And that one's related to our environments. And it's essentially the idea that, let me go back one. Yeah. That the environments that we're creating, the higher fidelity, the better, for sure. But at the same time, you can create systems that aren't real. Like, you can create environments that aren't, high fidelity in that sense. But as long as they're consistent, the plausibility illusion allows a sense of presence, even if these worlds aren't things that humans actually get to experience. One of my favorite kind of examples of that is the cafe, which is an experience in the Vive, where you get to actually walk around a virtual bar that's kind of created in the style of Vincent van Gogh. So it's like you're walking into a Van Gogh painting, and it's very present. Like, you're there, even though everything is very stylized, all the people, Van Gogh's there. And there's this moment where like you're looking out the window and like it's starry night out there and it's beautiful. And then he stands up and like looks out the window with you. And you get to make eye contact with Van Gogh, and it's a pretty surreal moment. And again, it's not an environment that would be real by any means, but because it's consistent, it's plausible. And so that's an interesting thing, especially as we start creating like abstract environments that allow us to process like data, for example. You can imagine that as long as the rules of the environment are consistent, we'll be able to create presence there. Any examples of this idea of plausibility, environmental illusions? Anybody? Yeah, you have one?
Last night I was reading something, and there was an article on any breakfast with your disease.
Right. Yeah. So this is interesting. Yeah, the disruption of death and like the idea of like death rituals and how we'll be able to reconnect with people. I would put it more in the social presence, but the plausibility thing is there. Like if it's consistent enough, you can convince yourself or suspend disbelief enough to say, maybe I am talking to someone who's not here with me anymore. Yeah, which is a fascinating question, and totally only in VR in a sense, right? The other one is redirected touch. There's some really interesting research behind this. Initially haptics, right? If you tried the bow and arrow demo, I've done many demos, and I get calls from friends after, and they're like, dude, my arm is sore. Like, what was that? And somehow the haptics, the vibration of the controller, like creates enough of an illusion that your muscles tense up, and it really feels like you're doing this thing that you're doing. Well, really, you're just waving your arms in the air, right? This would be sufficient. But the haptics, like, just creates this feeling that it's pretty compelling. Let me go back one. Spoiler alert, I got to fly as a bird one time. Another example of haptics is the idea of sensory substitution. David Eagleman from Baylor College of Medicine, he's now moved on to Silicon Valley actually, and so he's created this vest that creates haptics and vibrations on the body that reinterpret audio and gives people with deafness a subconscious understanding of the conversations happening in the room after 2 to 3 weeks, which is a pretty remarkable thing. 40 times less expensive than ocular implant or cochlear implant. And a really fascinating example of just the plasticity of our brain, right? Just haptics on your body can then be remixed and reinterpreted as different input, and our brain doesn't care, it'll just understand it after some time. Applications of that technology for like data visualization and data immersion, I think are really interesting as well, where you could like feel how your plane is flying. The drone team earlier, you can imagine wearing a system that like gives you all of the metrics on your body and sort of extending our skins outwards, which is really cool. And kind of related to that, this idea of like body ownership illusion. I was having a couple of conversations with this earlier around this idea. In this case, like I'm laying on a robot. The robot has wings, and I'm able to flap my actual arms and like move my body, and I'm flying over Tokyo as if I was a bird. And I really felt like that was me, And then getting too close to the ground, like the sort of self-preservation instincts like definitely kick in, Like it's all just part of this like process. I think the jump scares and a lot of the horror things that are happening are part of that conversation also. Like you can't help but preserve who you are. And yeah, Ritchie's plank experience is another really good example of that. Has anybody tried it? Ritchie's plank experience? Oh my gosh, you guys got to come over. It's amazing. Yeah. Another one of these illusions, space-time dilation. You can grab space-time and scale it. Like that's something that's only possible in VR. Has anybody tried that before? Yeah. So it's really interesting. It's essentially the same thing as Google Maps, right? You just pinch and zoom. But imagine doing that to this whole room, and suddenly you're bigger than everything, or you're smaller than everything. And that intuitive gesture, again, like super intuitive, really easy to understand, it's going to have huge implications for like nanotechnology and like being able to bring our cognition into these virtual worlds. Space dilation and time dilation. On the time side, being able to rewind time, slow down time. There's a lot of really good examples of that, but I kind of group them together in this idea. And then finally, social presence. As I mentioned, like we're all actually here. Making eye contact really helps. If you've had a social VR experience already where like the avatars are actually real people, that creates a sense of presence that I think is very different from all the previous ones that I mentioned. The uncanny valley is definitely a thing, right? If you have sort of disembodied or non-cognitive avatars that are simulating being human, your brain like immediately rejects that. But if you have an avatar, even stylized, that is actually behaving like a real human, suspension of disbelief kicks in again. And it's pretty exciting and fascinating. So I only have a few minutes, so I'm going to go through these really quick. Pokemon Go happened. Crazy example of mixed realities, right? Like it's like physical and digital, and there's like illusions and all these kinds of things. Field trip to Mars, this bus, they replaced all the windows, and they were able to create a simulation where they took the kids to Mars, and when the bus turned left in the real world, turned left on Mars as well. This was Framestore VR. They presented at Visualize this year, an amazing company. Google just a couple hours ago released Google Earth VR. So if you have the Vive, now you can explore the whole world at your leisure. Pretty remarkable. We were talking about maps earlier. This is a pretty high fidelity map of what's out there. And now being able to experience these things is going to be a pretty remarkable thing. Data visualization artists have been creating sort of these digital sculptures or physical sculptures that allow you to interact with data and like represent yourself, bring your body into the interaction. I think there's a lot of like methods that we can pick up from that world and bring them into the VR space. A year ago, I was at the MIT Media Lab, and I walked into the room and I saw this hologram. And then I got closer and I realized those are actually Legos, just a bunch of white Legos. They built out a city, and they used projectors to project metadata on top of the city. And they used depth cameras to actually create a virtual model of the Legos. So if you walk up to this thing, grab it, move it around, you're remixing the city, and the simulation reacts accordingly. So immediately intuitive, like a kid could pick these up and play with them, but infinitely sort of masterable, right? You could do so much with an interface like this. And the work we're doing at Persevere and with Field Tech is about leveraging some of these illusions to help in training simulations for really difficult problems and some situations that maybe we wouldn't want to put ourselves into, but by being able to create these physical illusions, we can learn how to react in those moments. And yeah, who saw this image before? I think I'm running low on time, but yeah. Speaking of mixed realities, is this a real photo or not? I think that question is sort of out of the picture now. It's Mark Zuckerberg taking a virtual selfie photo of him and his wife with their dog. The dog is in a 360 bubble. The wife is a real wife, but in a 2D screen. Mark Zuckerberg is an avatar, and they're all hanging out in virtual reality. So I think mixed realities is probably the best way to talk about these mediums. And again, they're really powerful, and we're very excited to see where you all are going to take these technologies to the future. So thank you again, and thanks for being here. Yeah.